Hello everybody and welcome to another video by Mahmoud Noer. This is Noer Yudarris, and today we'll be speaking about biology's own digestive system and what occurs from the moment food enters your mouth until it's released in the form of feces. So stay tuned, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, and please leave any comments about any topics you want us to discuss. Shall we start? So first off, what happens is there are two types of digestion, basically. Intracellular digestion, which is part of metabolism, and it's oxidation of glucose and fatty acids for energy. So for instance, you got processes that occur in your mitochondria, okay, such as glycolysis, glucogenesis, stuff like that. But I'm speaking about just internal uh, intracellular digestion in general. There are also processes like this that occur in the liver, but we'll be speaking about this later. Next, you also have extracellular digestion, so which is nutrients obtained from food, and then it travels within the alimentary canal mouth to the anus, and the extracellular digestion occurs in the stomach and the intestine area. Uh, a big part of the extracellular digestion are sphincters, which are circular, smooth muscles around the canal, and basically its function is to allow the travel between you got the travel between the esophagus and the stomach, and then between the stomach and the duodenum. All right, and sphincters are really significant because you don't want, for instance, the HCl, the hydrochloric acid, from the stomach to go into the duodenum and cause like burns. Digestion is divided into mechanical and chemical digestion. So enteric nervous system is a collection of millions of neurons that help function gastrointestinal system and trigger peristalsis. So peristalsis is basically a process controlled by the parasympathetic system, in which it's a rhythmic contraction of the gut tube to move the material through the system. So basically, peristalsis is the way food moves throughout like the whole process. And like I said, it triggers and controls the parasympathetic, triggers and controls peristalsis, increases it, and increases the glands in the stomach as well. So we're going to speak about what happens in the mouth or the oral cavity. So in the oral cavity, there's mastication that occurs. What mastication is the physical or mechanical breakdown of food to increase the surface area. So you want to increase the surface area of the food. You break it down, you keep chewing, 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 and then salivary glands produce saliva, which lubricate the food and make it easier to digest. So they do that using salivary amylase and lipase. Salivary amylase breaks down a starch into sugar monosaccharides, and then lipase breaks down lipids into fatty acids. Next we have the pharynx, right? And pharynx is consistent of nasopharynx, oropharynx, and laryngopharynx. The way I like to memorize this is like, oh, pharynx has three children, okay? Nasal, oral, and lary. Okay, nasal, oral, and lary. And then we got the epiglottis, which is a kind of a part in the back of the pharynx. It kind of prevents food from entering the larynx, okay, because there's kind of two tubes, when you breathe in and when the food goes down. In the esophagus, the opposite of peristalsis, in which is it's vomiting, is due to chemical reactants or physical stimulation. So peristalsis can be reversed and during emesis, which is vomiting, and moves content from the stomach out to the mouth. Alright, so vomiting, let's say you want to get fancy and you see someone vomit, of course you help them, but then you're like, oh yeah, you just went through emesis process. And then stomach is divided into four parts. Okay, you got the fundus and the body gastric glands, and then you got the antrum and the pyloric glands, and you got the lesser curvature, and then you got the greater curvature. These are basically just the borders that make the curve of the stomach. And then gastric glands are really significant because with the gastric glands, they're activated by parasympathetic system, and they have three important, or they kind of control three important type of cells: mucus cells or goblet cells, chief cells, and parietal cells. So with the mucus cells, these are cells that produce rich mucus to help protect the muscle walls from the pH, the strong hydro HCl pH. We know how there is acid in our stomach that helps break down the food. So in order for our stomach to not kind of um, get damaged over time, we have these mucus cells that produce the mucus to protect the lining. Next, you have the chief cells, which secrete pepsinogen to digest proteins. So chief cells secrete pepsinogen to digest proteins. And then you have parietal cells, which secrete H plus ions as HCl cleaves pepsinogen to pepsin. Right? So parietal cells help make HCl stronger in order to cleave pepsinogen to pepsin. And then you got pyloric glands. So the pyloric glands that we spoke about earlier contain something called G cell. G cells produce gastrin, and gastrin is an entropeptide. We're going to be speaking about that soon. And with gastrin, gastrin secretes more HCl and signals the stomach to mix the content. So gastrin is really significant as it secretes HCl and then tells the stomach, yo, stomach, right? Start mixing the stuff up so the food can break down. Small intestine is consistent of duodenum, jejunum, and ileum. The way I like to memorize this, I say DJI. It's easy, DJI. Let's say you're at a intestine party. DJI is gonna be handling the beat. Okay, I don't know. It's just a way I memorize it. And then we're going to speak about what occurs once the content decides to leave the stomach and goes into the duodenum. So it goes into the duodenum using the pyloric sphincter. Okay, so the pyloric sphincter is really significant because allows for the content to move, but then it doesn't allow for the HCl as much. It kind of like vents it back, and that's why sphincter is, like I said, are really significant. And then the food goes through the duodenum. You see this kind of yellow area? This is the duodenum. And then enzymes, lactase and maltase, they break down disaccharides, and then peptides are broken down by entropeptides. So entropeptides start to be secreted in the duodenum to help break down food. So sucrase here digests sucrose, lactase digests lactose, maltase digests maltose, and then entropeptides activates tyrosine, I think, that triggers trypsin. All right, trypsinogen and triggers trypsin. So entropeptides acts on trypsinogen, and then the trypsinogen acts on trypsin to activate it. And then trypsin really works in producing secretin. So secretin is a peptide hormone that is released to the acidity of the chyme, causes pancreatic enzymes to release in the duodenum for two reasons: to regulate the pH and for chyme. Alright, chyme is basically partially digested food that still needs further breakdown, but still has acidic. It's still acidic. Like the acidity from the HCl is still there, and you don't want really that much acidity going on in the duodenum. That's what secretin does. It tells the pancreatic enzymes, you'll come and regulate the pH, please. I don't want that much acidity. And then next you have the CKK, or the choleocytokinin. So choleocytokinin, which stimulate the gallbladder to secrete and stimulate bile and pancreatic juice to break down food in the duodenum. And like I said, CKK is in response to fat and protein in the food, and it kind of hits up the gallbladder, and it's like, yo, secrete and stimulate bile so I can and pancreatic juices so I can break down food. And then we got the pancreas. Pancreas releases insulin, glucagon, and somatostatin for proper blood level and exocrine cells called acinar. So acinar cells. So acinar cells produce pancreatic juices. Pancreatic juices are bicarbonate rich, and that's what makes it easy to like break down food. Next, we have pancreatic amylase, which breaks down polysaccharides. So you recognize the word amylase, it means it breaks down like sugars. And then bile is stored in the gallbladder, and bile is a salt, by the way. It's not an enzyme. Bile is a salt. So bile breaks down fat, as bile salts have hydrophobic and hydrophilic regions, which help hydrophobic fats stay solubilized in the hydrophobic uh, body secretions. Bile salts help the pancreas lipase, which cleaves fat, forming methyloses. Carbs. Pancreas releases pancreatic amylase to break down carbs, and it releases pancreatic peptidases to break down protein, and releases pancreatic lipase to break down fats. And then we have cardiac sphincter. So cardiac sphincter is controls the movement of the bolus from the esophagus to the stomach, and pyloric sphincter controls the movement of the chyme from the stomach to the duodenum. So chyme is the partially digested food that is acidic. Okay, and then liver processes a nutrient through glycolysis and glycogenesis. It's the internal intracellular digestion that we were speaking about. So liver stores and immobilizes fat. It produces bile. So bile is produced in the liver but stored in the gallbladder, and produces urea, which helps break down protein in the liver. So we got three nutrients: the carbs, proteins, and lipids. So carbs, they're associated with salivary amylase produced by the salivary glands in the oral cavity, and then you got the pancreatic amylase produced by the pancreas, and then you got maltase, isomaltase, sucrase, and lactase produced by the intestinal gland and the intestine. And then you got proteins. You got pepsin, trypsin, chymotrypsin, aminopeptase, and endopeptidase. So in order to just recognize proteins, you're gonna kind of see SIN at the end, as you see pepsin, trypsin, or you're gonna see peptidase. So pep relates to proteins. Pep. And then pepsin is produced by the gastric glands. Early on, trypsin, pancreas, chymotrypsin in the pancreas as well, and then in the duodenum, they release this stuff, and then aminopeptase and endopeptase is in the intestinal glands, and then lastly bile, and then bile and lipase break down lipids. So bile is released at the end by CKK, like we said, produced in the liver, and pancreatic juices, lipase, produced by the pancreas. Next, we have the two parts of what do you call it? The small intestine, jejunum and ileum, DJI. So the jejunum and ileum are for absorption mainly. They contain absorption. They contain villi, which are covered with microvilli for absorption. And villi contain two things. They contain a lactal and a capillary bed. So the lactal absorbs fat-soluble compounds, okay? You know how sometimes there are vitamins that are fat-soluble and water-soluble? They have lactal for fat-soluble compounds, and then capillary beds absorb water-soluble compounds. Large intestine absorbs water and salts, forming semi-solid feces. So the nutrients are absorbed in the jejunum and the ileum, and then the water and the salts are absorbed in the large intestine or the colon. And then you have the caseum. The caseum outpockets the large intestine and accepts fluid exiting the small intestine through the ileocecal valve, and it's a site of attachment of the appendix. And then from the caseum it goes to the colon, which is also the large intestine, and then from the large intestine it goes to the rectum, and then the rectum has internal anal sphincter, and then the external anal sphincter, which the feces, the semi-solid feces, exit. And then cecum is home to many aerobic bacteria that produce symbiotic relationship and help produce vitamin K and biotin, which is also vitamin B7. These gut bacteria are mutualistic beneficial bacteria, means they benefit, and they benefit the human body, and they also live inside the human body without being like freeloaders. Alright, so thank you so much for watching the video. Please let me know if you have any questions, and leave comments down below what you think, and have a blessed day.